this go bag, at least the first part of the presentation. So thanks for coming, everyone. I'm very excited. It's a real privilege to be here, a real privilege. I'm very lucky to be here and very thankful. So I hope that this introduction to my dissertation, the proposal, is substantive and gives you a good idea of the direction that I'm going with the dissertation. And your comments and feedback are more than welcome, because I need to make everything right between now and mid-December, when I hope to defend the dissertation altogether. Now, the timing of this presentation seems to be a little late, but I think it's appropriate due to the grounded theory that I've been doing. If I had given a proposal defense 2-3 years ago, it would have looked totally different. And as I was telling Dr. Miller beforehand, I wouldn't have got to the same place now if I had started in a certain direction then. But I started in a very ambiguous direction 2.5 years ago on this work with the can men, and it ultimately led me to where I am today, which I couldn't be more pleased with. And I hope that I can explain very clearly where I am today and where I will be mid-December through this presentation. The title is a newer one, Hand-to-Mouth Experience of Homelessness in Michigan. I think it sums up as briefly and succinctly as possible the points that I'm trying to make overall in the presentation today and in the dissertation. That picture is not random. It reminds me of a participant in my study, so it kicks me off on the right foot. The structure of this presentation is following the format on the sociology department's website. I'm going to talk about the problem of homelessness. I'm going to quantify that regionally and also nationally. I'm going to redefine the problem. I'll deliver my problem statement, touch on theory just a little bit, and literature. It covers about 3 slides, even though it's integrated into the entire presentation. I have 3 hypotheses. I'll talk 1 slide on data, 1 slide on the analysis process, and 2 or 3 slides at the end about the contribution to the field. First, one of the questions I get most frequently when I tell someone I'm studying homelessness, they'll want to know how many homeless people are in America. Quantifying the problem is sort of the first step towards acknowledging the problem and also scoping it. This little chart shows from 2007 to 2014 the number of homeless individuals counted. It's important qualifier, counted in America. So we had about 650,000 counted in 2007, and currently we have 578,424 counted individuals. Now, the counts began in 1983 in 60 municipalities. Now we have expanded the count in America to 414 continuums of care. The first national count was really conducted in 2005, so we've only been counting for about 10 years. But the first real substantive national count was 2007. That's why the chart starts there. There were some problems initially in the count as it began from 2007 to 2009. Large cities like Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Detroit extrapolated the count. They didn't necessarily count every individual. And so what the difference in the 2 lines here is this is the national numbers. Now, if you take out Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Detroit, you see a big difference here in a national decline versus a national incline. So again, the numbers showed a decline. Take out those 3 cities that extrapolated data. In actuality, it was potentially an incline. So I'm showing this because there are problems with the count. The count doesn't necessarily define the problem, but it is, as it is there, 578,424 individuals. Trying to advance slides on their own computer. Another way to quantify the problem is to categorize those individuals that were counted. There are 30 categories available from the point in time counted data. So I would be able to show you any count of, say, unsheltered families in one continuum of care, if that was Lansing, East Lansing, for example. Any one of these categories is currently counted and data is available on it. The current focus of the federal government is really on chronic homelessness and veteran homelessness. So there are a couple categories there. There is some emphasis on young adult homeless. And here are the categories for chronic. Yeah, there's chronic, and veteran. These are the current federal focuses. I'm currently focusing my dissertation on just the 5 categories at the top highlighted in yellow. I'm not really categorizing individuals. I'm just, through convenient sampling, dealing with those who are in the shelter, those who are unsheltered, like tent cities, and individuals. I have a limitation in the study that I can't really examine homeless families that thoroughly. Mostly that's because of gatekeepers, and a lot of times they're at domestic violence shelters that are closed off. So it's a different population that I don't have as much access to. Quantifying the problem regionally, this is Michigan statistics. You can see really blatantly the problem with extrapolating the Detroit count. But once Detroit stopped extrapolating and started actually counting in 2009, here you see numbers of 14,000, 10,311 without Detroit. It goes up and down just slightly. In 6 years, we've only decreased homelessness count by about 1,800 in the state. It's gone down, then up, then down, then down, and last count it went up a little bit. I'll give you a couple quick facts through the media representation. There's a 7-year high in Grand Rapids this year. There are 24% fewer homeless in Washtenaw County. There is a focus in Washtenaw County on chronic and veteran homelessness. And there's been a 64% increase in homelessness this year in Genesee County, which is where Flint is. So those are some of the portrayals in the media. I didn't go so far as to look into that data for this presentation, but I'm assuming they didn't get their numbers wrong, although that's not uncommon in the media. One media story I referenced in the proposal said that Chicago had 100,000 homeless individuals, and the real count was 6,000. So I did a screen capture of that just because I couldn't believe what I was reading, that the media would overestimate more than 10, almost 20 times the count. Didn't make much sense, but. Honing into the continuums of care, again, 12,227 homeless individuals in Michigan. You see some counts here, again, highlighting the continuum of care areas that I was focusing my research for this dissertation. Lansing, East Lansing counts 429 homeless individuals. Ann Arbor counts 545. Detroit counts 2,755. There is a large count of 2,253 of what's called the balance of the state. And so that you can see the balance of the state includes upper lower Michigan and a lot of the upper peninsula aside from Marquette. So that's why there's so many just generically counted in that continuum of care. I do a little research in Flint, 635 homeless there. A little in Oakland County, 457 homeless counted there. And to give you some perspective, there are 125 beds at the Delana Center, which is one of the venues of my research. 125 beds, that's at a shelter in Ann Arbor where there are 545 counted individuals. So that's just to give some perspective and context to where I was at. Shelters about a quarter of the homeless individuals in Ann Arbor. It's one of the reasons that that was a good venue for my research. So to summarize the problem quantitatively, over 500,000 in the United States, 30 categories used in the count, 12,000 in Michigan, 21 continuums of care in Michigan, and the federal government spending $5.7 billion on their plan called Open Doors to prevent and end homelessness by 2017. The original target date there was 2015, but they didn't come anywhere close to that. Nationally, we decreased homelessness by 13,000. We spent $5 billion to do that. So it's really an effort of management. So this is the dilemma here. When we ask ourselves how many homeless individuals there are, Blasey in 1990 argues that that's really just a question intended to manage the number of homeless individuals. It's not a question to end homelessness. Blasey is an attorney or a law professor at UCLA. And so in Los Angeles, there are 90,000 homeless individuals, but only 9,000 beds. So if you knew there were 90,000 homeless individuals, it seems like you'd either offer 90,000 beds or change something structurally. But knowing the number of the homeless in Detroit and Los Angeles has only, I agree with Blasey, has only really met the need of managing the problem, not eliminating it. So with these antecedent questions to what's the homeless problem, if we have a question of how many there are and why are there so many homeless, and we count them and we categorize them, again, that's just a way to manage the problem. We ask ourselves, why do we want to know how many homeless people there are? If we want to know that, it's just to manage that number of individuals. So my problem statement, clearly right there on the left side, really emphasizes the fact that counting the number of homeless individuals in America is somewhat of a flawed approach to solving the problem. The counted number appears to be decreasing. There are other problems with that. So as the counted number of homeless in America decreases, the actual number of individuals living in extreme poverty is rising. So it's important to study the lives of those individuals who cope with circumstances of extreme poverty, specifically homelessness in this case, because there are strategies and makeshift economies that will subsist and sustain throughout decades for those surviving at the margins, whether they're categorized as homeless, chronically homeless, or what. So Blasey, in the same article, says there's no such group as the homeless. I tend to agree with them. Homelessness, as I said, we could just give everyone a home that would not eradicate the problem of extreme poverty. Whether or not if someone lives at a shelter, technically they have a home. You know, if someone lives in a tent, they have a home. So to label them homeless is somewhat flawed. The state of homelessness, in other words, the circumstance, alters personal identities. Through these coping strategies, the behaviors are perceived in public a lot of times, and those identities then transform the individual, is what I'm going to argue for. So this is a visualization of the problem that I see. I have an assumption on the next slide, which is structural forces of extreme poverty cause circumstances, specifically homelessness. There is a lack of upward mobility for these individuals who experience homelessness. That circumstance leads to coping strategies. We all have coping strategies with our own lives, but the coping strategies in this situation, which was caused by structural forces, then manifest in activities like begging or living in a tent, sleeping rough. When those are perceived in public, this forms or constructs the identity of the homeless individual, even those individuals that have housing. That identity in the minds of the public becomes the public understanding of the homeless problem, and then that public understanding is going to influence policy creation. So this is sort of a cyclical problem of the origin and implementation of knowledge through policy. So this is, again, a study on homelessness, but homelessness is really a way, as I said, there's no group of homeless, there's only the extremely marginalized. So this is a chart that shows the American families stratified into 5 groups. So there are 81 million families in America. A fifth of those families would be 16 million families. 16 million families. So when you stratify the incomes into fifths, here is the lowest fifth. Those individuals, families with household incomes of 15,000 and less would be here. The second, third, and fourth fifths are represented by these lines. And what this means is, what this graph represents is the jump from level to level or tier to tier. So the jump from the lowest fifth income, which is 15,000 for the family, up to the second fifth, which is 38,000 family income. That's a 120% jump. The jump from second to third is here at 40%. The jump from third to fourth income level, fifth, is here at 20 some. And then the fourth to the fifth, highest fifth is there. So what this it shows is that with family income, the hardest leap is from the bottom up to the second. Once people get from second to third and third to fourth, these are middle-class individuals who don't have as hard a time, just statistically, as that jump from lowest to second rung. So this shows a stratification that has existed for 50 years. It also shows that not only is the jump from lowest to second, fifth the hardest, but it's also getting harder as the trend line indicates. So this is not just a problem of housing, giving an individual a house. This is a problem of individual or families in this representation. They have other components of their experience that are making it difficult to be upwardly mobile. The following three slides are theory and literature, just to give a background of where I'm coming from. So this is Anderson, 1923, did the sociology of the homeless man. He talked about daily routines that exemplify limitations or constraints of structures placed on those individuals. Those routines, replicated over and over, show repeatedly the narrow limits and the constraints placed on the individual. So the unit of analysis in my case is the homeless man or woman, and it's going to show social constraints like Anderson did. There are generalizable themes, and I'm looking at the phenomenon of daily life. Structure and action definitions. I look at the structure of the social system as consisting of actors and audiences, for example. These interactions take place in environments, physical, cognitive environments. And the actors on both sides, actor and audience, relate to the situation. They come with prior knowledge, present knowledge, they come with future knowledge. And there's an interaction involving shared symbols. So this is all stuff from Parsons. Berger, I use some social constructionism where the shared symbols of interactions, just here looking at transportation on one of the days of my study. We obviously know that there's a symbol of welfare in the BMW, symbol of authority in the police, symbol of poverty. These are known by all actors in the interaction. And so the knowledge is shared. There are symbols. I'm looking at social construction. I'm also looking at symbolic interactionism. This is from Bloomer. The actions are activities. They construct knowledge, and the knowledge is shared. I mean, this is really basic stuff, but I want to tell you where I'm coming from in this study. So the main assumption I have is built into several of those prior slides, which are there are structural forces, there are stratification, and there are circumstances that exist, that have existed for 50 years that manifest in these circumstances of extreme poverty, specifically homelessness. I'm assuming that that's true. I'm not arguing that it's not true. I'm just going to take that as an assumption. And then I'm going to look at the circumstances that are derived from that assumption. So my hypotheses here, the three slides on hypotheses. My first hypothesis is that individuals who experience homelessness navigate the circumstances of that extreme poverty situation, and they navigate their lack of life chances through a series of coping strategies. Hypothesis 2, when those coping strategies are publicly observed, identities are socially constructed to form a generally understood public knowledge of homelessness, or definition of homelessness. Definition, that's what. And then hypothesis 3, specifically that that generally understood definition of homelessness does not encompass four key things. Number one, it does not encompass the structural forces that that influence these lives of poverty and lack of upward mobility or inequality. That public knowledge does not encompass the diversity of experiences of the homeless. That public knowledge does not encompass coping strategies. It does not acknowledge coping strategies. And that public understanding is a construction of identity. The data that I'm examining is phenomenon of everyday life. I'm going to observe that in public situations, mostly, some private. I'm going to perform ethnography. I'm going to take extensive field notes. I'm going to perform casual interviews. I'm going to record a lot of those. Some surveys just to triangulate some of the data. Overall, there's an ethnography, embedded ethnography, coupled with me living there and also me as a civilian interacting with these homeless individuals separately. Visual ethnographic data is used to triangulate my themes. In other words, I'm not coming up with themes strictly from the pictures. I'm going to use those to sort of buttress the themes that I found through my observations. So I'm looking at the construction of reality. Object of my analysis is phenomenon, so it's a lot phenomenological. It's empirical study, and it's somewhat pragmatic. I'm going to analyze the qualitative data, mostly using a tool called Deduce. I'm going to describe what the participants experience and how they experience it. I'm going to conduct grounded theory. I'm going to begin with open coding. I'm going to code themes like coping strategies. I'm going to find emergent categories like the first available option, coping strategy or technique. The codes are going to represent both my expectations and hypotheses, coupled with things I don't expect, like certain surprising information and things that are conceptually interesting. I'm not going to quantify much within my dissertation other than frequency tables. And I can show you a slide on that, but it's not going to be a main component. So the contribution of this dissertation is new grounded theory about what causes the phenomena to occur, and then what strategies or actions are employed in response to that phenomenon. The phenomena that I'm involving are those of extreme poverty, most often situation of homelessness. The responsive actions that I'm explaining, in other words, coping strategies, I expect many of those exacerbate the problem, the pre-existing problem of diminished life chances and lack of upward mobility. I expect that the structural force of extreme poverty produces behaviors that add to the already increasing inequality. There is historical significance and cultural current relevancy to my dissertation. This shows two photos, be 75 years apart, showing the same sort of behavior out of the same circumstance. So there's historical connectivity there between these two photos and phenomena, and there's current context here, represented by this photo on the left. Again, the problem is not exclusive to homelessness, and so the contribution to this of this dissertation to the field is not exclusively a contribution of homeless analysis. It is contribution to the overall field of inequality, poverty, and mobility. And this just shows that the rising number of individuals living at 50% of poverty or lower is growing. It's currently over 20 million individuals. So the point there is we could eliminate homelessness, so it could say functional zero, but then we would still have 20.5 million people living under 50% of the poverty level, which is barely over $5,000 a year. And that's the contribution of this dissertation, is coping with that level of poverty. So it's more than just homelessness. Looking at micro phenomena, interactions and situations that I'm going to argue are products and contributing factors to macro social forces. And I just use this picture to show that point of view, which I'm going to argue in depth in the dissertation. This is really a macro structural force, city planning or removal of a public park bench, which significantly influenced this man's day-to-day behaviors, what he does, where he sits, and where he lives. And so I just end on this point of emphasis, which is in the 1980s, there was a spike in homelessness. It was seen by everyone. That's a generalization. it became more visible. Homelessness became more visible in the 80s. There were policies developed in response to it. So now the trend line is that homelessness is decreasing. And so one of my fears would be that as the numbers go down, it's not addressed. The problem of extreme poverty is not addressed through policies as it was in a response to the visual problem of homelessness in the 1980s. So as the number of homeless goes down, I fear that it's going to lose emphasis in the policy. And so the fact that it looked like a third world country in the 80s, I think that it's starting to look less like a third world country, and then people are losing their interest in the homeless, the fight against homelessness. And so the contribution of this dissertation is to sort of expose and just reintroduce other issues than the visual homeless bum on the side of the street. So that is the last slide, other than sort of, these are some of the quantitative tables that I could use in the dissertation, but I plan to use some of them. In case you wanted to know more about deduce, if you're unfamiliar with deduce, these are some of the types of frequency tables that I can use. So that's the substance that I had. That's the message that I wanted to deliver. That's the foundation of my dissertation, my point of view, and that's what I'll be writing in the next 2 months. So, any questions, comments, criticisms?
No, reading the dissertation and even in this presentation, you use the term man a lot instead of like a homeless individual. Are these mainly males? I mean, is that a conscious effort to use the term man, or?
That's a good question, and I have a conscious effort in that use. It was simply not to say they. So it was just that thing where I picked a pronoun and went with it. So the answer is no. It's going to involve a lot of females. In the dissertation, I'm going to specifically make reference to the gender of the individual. In this presentation, just so that I didn't have to say they, I chose man. That's all.
I have other questions. Some just clarification. Like, I play baseball here in Lansing area, and after games at Muni, I think we talked about this. We have homeless individuals come out and collect the beer cans and so on. When they're doing counts, is this a certain time of year that they're doing counts? Because we understand a lot of these people leave. They get on a train, they find transportation out of here during winter, and they come back in the summer.
Yeah, that really stirs up a lot in me because there are so many problems with the count. But to answer your question, it's on one day. In the dissertation, in the study, I participated in the count, in counting. I went out and counted. We counted 0 people. You didn't look very hard. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it is. That's why I'm asking.
So that is, and it is a night in January. So specifically on a cold night.
Who determines what day? I mean, is it a federal thing, a state thing, a back organization thing?
It's definitely a federal thing. There's I think it's called Interagency Council on Homelessness or something. It's whoever coordinates all the continuums of care. And that's how it is employed, through the 414 continuums of care. So that continuum of care, they know the shelters and they all the agencies. So it's like a collection of the shelters and the missions, and everybody kind of might know where everyone's hiding out. So I'm assuming they know about the tent city behind Muni. I don't know how they could, but whether or not they capture all that is, who knows? And it's volunteers that go out and count. So you get these upper middle class people in Oakland County that are just not trying hard.
Not trying hard, or they don't know where to go, or both, or
definitely, it's definitely both. Definitely both. As a participant in the count, they gave me almost 0 education about what to do. And it's funny. In the van ride, they knew that I was doing a study on homelessness. And so they kept looking at me, asking me where they should look. But it was really cold. And so, we tried, but we didn't really try all the way. So they weren't instructed. I couldn't tell them because I wanted to observe. And then once, they got a lead from the fire department, they didn't really go all the way into the woods. They're a little scared too. So it's a combination.
In terms more specific towards, because I mean, these are just clarifications.
Yeah.
I don't think it needs to be a dissertation. And again, not this is a critique that you have to do or not do, but the notion of hypotheses and symbolic interaction don't always go together. Is this just a term you're using? They didn't really look like the typical hypotheses, but more a matter of these are, they use the term sensitizing concepts, and this notion of structure. These are things I want to look at, but you're not really testing them, or are you testing them in a hypothesis way?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I followed the format to follow the format,
Okay.
and I am not really planning to test hypotheses.
I would say you can use these as like Toby says, sensitizing concepts or key questions. Don't even use people don't use hypotheses generally with qualitative methods, partially because how do you know? I mean, you have a general inkling that, usually hypothesis involves,
redefine the problem. I'll deliver my problem statement, touch on theory just a little bit, and literature. It covers about 3 slides, even though it's integrated into the entire presentation. I have 3 hypotheses. I'll talk 1 slide on data, 1 slide on the analysis process, and 2 or 3 slides at the end about the contribution to the field. First, one of the questions I get most frequently when I tell someone I'm studying homelessness, they'll want to know how many homeless people are in America. Quantifying the problem is sort of the first step towards acknowledging the problem and also scoping it. This little chart shows from 2007 to 2014 the number of homeless individuals counted. It's important qualifier, counted in America. So we had about 650,000 counted in 2007, and currently we have 500 in a very ambiguous direction 2.5 years ago on this work with the can men, and it ultimately led me to where I am today, which I couldn't be more pleased with, and I hope that I can explain very clearly where I am today and where I will be mid-December through this presentation. The title is a newer one, Hand-to-Mouth Experience of Homelessness in Michigan. I think it sums up as briefly and succinctly as possible the points that I'm trying to make overall in the presentation today and in the dissertation. That picture is not random. It reminds me of a participant in my study, so it kicks me off on the right foot. The structure of this presentation is following the format on the sociology department's website. I'm going to talk about the problem of homelessness. I'm going to quantify that regionally and also nationally. I'm going to decline versus a national incline. So again, the numbers showed a decline. Take out those 3 cities that extrapolated data. In actuality, it was potentially an incline. So I'm showing this because there are problems with the count. The count doesn't necessarily define the problem, but it is, as it is there, 578,424 individuals. Trying to advance slides on their own computer. Another way to quantify the problem is to categorize those individuals that were counted. There are 30 categories available from the point in time counted data. So I would be able to show you any count of, say, unsheltered families in one continuum of care, if that was Lansing, East Lansing, for example. Any one of these categories is currently counted and data is available on it. The current focus is 78,424 counted individuals. Now the counts began in 1983 in 60 municipalities. Now we have expanded the count in America to 414 continuums of care. The first national count was really conducted in 2005, so we've only been counting for about 10 years. But the first real substantive national count was 2007. That's why the chart starts there. There were some problems initially in the count as it began from 2007 to 2009. Large cities like Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Detroit extrapolated the count. They didn't necessarily count every individual. And so what the difference in the 2 lines here is this is the national numbers. Now if you take out Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Detroit, you see a big difference here in a national decline. This go back, at least the first part of the presentation. So thanks for coming, everyone. I'm very excited. It's a real privilege to be here, a real privilege. I'm very lucky to be here and very thankful. So I hope that this introduction to my dissertation, the proposal, is substantive and gives you a good idea of the direction that I'm going with the dissertation. And your comments and feedback are more than welcome because I need to make everything right between now and mid-December when I hope to defend the dissertation altogether. Now the timing of this presentation seems to be a little late, but I think it's appropriate due to the grounded theory that I've been doing. If I had given a proposal defense 2-3 years ago, it would have looked totally different. And as I was telling Dr. Miller beforehand, I wouldn't have got to the same place now if I had started in a certain direction then. But I started